Welcome to the Just Solutions podcast. I'm your host, Aiko Schaefer, Executive Director of Just Solutions. In today's episode, we'll explore electrification and discuss the implications for environmental justice. I'm joined today by Jamal Lewis, Director, State and Local Policy at Rewiring America. Rewiring America is an organization that's working to transition homes, businesses, and communities to electricity. They focus on helping people save money, tackle nationwide emission goals, improve health, and build a clean energy workforce. Welcome, Jamal, to the Just Solutions podcast. Today, we're talking about electrification and the policy opportunities around the issue for BIPOC frontline communities. Jamal, it's so great to have you on our show. Before we dig in, I just have to ask, what's it like working with Stacey Abrams?
It's awesome. And thank you so much, Aiko, for having me. Thank you to the Just Solutions Collective for hosting this podcast and all the awesome work that you're doing. It is tremendous working with Stacey. Stacey is a trailblazer, a strong movement builder, and strong advocate as well. And just to know that Stacey is out there pushing the message of electrification forward, it's just tremendous.
That's great. Just had to ask, I'm a big fan and really impressed with the work that you all are doing and just your ability to bring really, significant leaders into this conversation and the ability for her to be able to engage and galvanize the conversation that we need to have around electrification. I get to work with an amazing team too, isn't it? It's the best part of doing this type of work. So let's get in some questions and talk a little bit about the work that you're doing around electrification. So can you help our listeners understand a little bit more about the concept of electrification? Why is it important to electrify everything?
Yeah, electrification is a relatively newer term, but what it simply means is switching and transitioning from a fossil fuel powered machine to an electric machine that is zero emission. A lot of people know about what's happening with electric vehicles. That is a form of electrification. So, there's this movement towards going electric. And, if you watch TV, you'll see more and more car companies coming out with their versions of the electric vehicle. That is the process of electrification playing out in real time. Now, what people are less familiar with are the electric versions of the machines that we have in our homes. That includes our heating systems. That includes our water heating systems, our stoves, ovens, clothes dryers. There are both fossil fuel and electric versions, and we're working to help people switch to electric, zero emission versions for many reasons.
I think you're absolutely right. We all think about electric vehicles. We haven't really talked about electrification of other things in our homes. I mean, how aware do you think people are about alternative electric appliances, other electric options in their lives when you look broadly at the general public?
I don't think people are that aware of what's available to them in their homes. And that is part of the reason why Rewiring America exists today. We exist in part because of the premise that 42% of our country's pollution, our energy-related pollution, comes from consumer decisions that consumers make. And that includes, like I said, decisions to choose what we use to heat and cool our homes and water, how we cook our food, and how we get from place to place. And if we have a car, that includes what the type of car that we drive. I'd say most people don't think about what's providing heat to their house until it breaks. It is at that point that it's really important that people are conscious of the types of machines that are available to them.
I feel like in the news I've watched or read a lot about kind of rising awareness about the pollution risk of using gas stoves and natural gas in your home. I mean, do you feel like those types of conversations are helping to kind of drive your conversation? Do you think that's generating some desire, awareness to make that change?
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about the reasons why anyone makes a decision, there's often a set of core principles that we all use. Some people are driven entirely by cost. So if it's going to cost me less money, I'm going to go with that decision. Other people are driven by, self-preservation, health. So if me making this decision means that I'm going to be healthier, I'm going to make that decision, even if it costs me more. There's a lot of reasons why people make decisions, but what we're finding is, those people who are very cognizant of both their and their family's health, the message of the pollution that gas stoves emit in our homes is driving and helping to draw attention to alternatives that exist. I think the reality is there are much better, much more efficient machines to cook on, to heat, to cool. And what we're doing is just trying to alert people of what those machines are. You can get a machine that operates at like 2 to 3 times the efficiency of a fossil fuel machine that costs less and, isn't emitting anything. There's just much better options available out there. And the health message definitely is helping to drive that point home.
When you think about, what is getting in the way to electrify everything, what do you see as some of the big barriers?
Awareness, inertia. I think those are two of the biggest barriers that we see. Like I mentioned earlier, we don't really think about what's heating and cooling our home until it breaks. If it's a comfortable temperature when I walk in the door, I don't think about it. But if I walk in, and it's 30 degrees inside, I'm gonna be like, what's going on? What's wrong with my heating system? And the same with cooling. Like if I walk in the door and it's over 100, I'm going to wonder what's going on with my cooling system. And so these are moments where we're targeting intervention. I'd say even though that is the point where most people are, start to think about what's heating and cooling their homes or, those machines that are present. And even if they are the ultimate decision maker, I think in a lot of cases, they aren't the people who are making the recommendations. Contractors are really important in this scenario. My parents, they own their home. They have a contractor that they seek advice for everything. So, and oftentimes they're going to go with what the contractor recommends because the contractor knows what he's doing. They've been in a relationship for almost my entire life. So it's that sort of trust that is present. And if that contractor is dead set on replacing the furnace with another furnace, that's what's likely going to happen. So even though there are much better machines out there, it's also important that we're educating and increasing awareness among contractors and challenging them, for that matter, to install these much better, more efficient machines.
You all also work on public policy. It's how we've partnered organizationally, is really in the policy sphere. I mean, what do you see the role of public policy in the near term over a period of time? What role will it play to really make this transition possible?
Yeah, policy is really important. It's really important, and at the same time, it's not necessary. I can envision a world where people just start to realize, and actually this is happening, just last year, for the first time, electric heat pumps, which is, the electric version of a heating system, outsold gas furnaces. So we're already starting to see more and more people realize that there are much more effective and efficient machines out there to do the job that we want it to do. So I envision that continuing and word of mouth sort of getting out there and more people adopting this mantra of going all electric. Public policy helps that. We can make it easier for people to go all electric. We can smooth some of the obstacles that exist for people, which is only going to help. But we're already starting to see that momentum. And the same thing with electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are a sexy topic right now. My dad was just talking about how he was interested in trying to get an electric vehicle. He's not sure when it would happen, but it's piqued his interest. And I think if we tap into that excitement around electric vehicles and we channel that to our heating systems, we'll only accelerate this movement. But the movement's already happened.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think there's definitely a desire to, think about your cars. As Americans, we love, what kind of car you drive. It says a lot about who you are and your personality. It'd be really interesting to see if you can get that to the place where people are thinking about their heating and stovetops in that same way. When you think about all the decisions that have been made federally recently in the Biden administration, investing more in this transition to clean energy, what impact is that going to have on all of this?
It's a tremendous impact. Through the Inflation Reduction Act, there are billions of dollars that are hitting the market and will be hitting the market over this next decade. And what that does is help to provide some market clarity in terms of where we're going as a society. There's the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is a $27 billion pot of funding, a revolving pot of funding that is intended to reduce greenhouse gas pollution. There's a plethora of tax credits that are available, including electrification tax credits and as well as renewable energy tax credits. So all of these incentives are going to jumpstart this electrification movement and again, make it easier for people to transition. And that is going to provide a significant amount of clarity for both homeowners, manufacturers, contractors, distributors, policymakers. It's just going to provide a tremendous amount of clarity for all of those entities.
And can you help our listeners understand a little more about those potential opportunities? So What are some examples of things that are available to the consumer, so someone who's thinking about themselves and their homes, and what's available for communities? So our listeners who, maybe work for an environmental organization or a community-based organization can think about maybe how they're electrifying their building, their organization, their communities. I mean, what are some very specific or tangible opportunities that people might see or be able to take advantage of under the new federal prioritization of transitioning to clean energy?
Yeah. So right now, there are tax credits available for installing an electric heat pump water heater. This is part of the 25C tax credit. That is a $2,000 tax credit, again, for installing electric heat pumps. This is a uncapped tax credit, which means there's not like a set dollar amount that is available for these tax credits. Anyone, as long as you're eligible, can seek this and receive it. There's not going to be a point in which the Department of Treasury, who administers tax credits, is going to say, oh, we ran out of money. That's not the case here. So that's what I mean when I say uncapped. There is a limit of $2,000. But not only is it uncapped, it is also available, like it resets every year. So if this year you want to invest in your electric heat pump space heater, you can do that. And then wait till next year to invest in your heat pump water heater. The structure of this tax credit lends itself well to sort of planning and mapping out the upgrades that you want to do for your home. There is a caveat here. Unfortunately, that tax credit is not refundable. To actually realize the benefits of this tax credit, you have to owe the government money. And what this tax credit does is it reduces the amount that you owe. For example, if I owe $10,000, but I installed a heat pump last year where I can get the total max of $2,000. That credit will reduce my $10,000 bill to $8,000. What can't happen is me not owing any money to the government, installing a heat pump, and then getting a refund on that $2,000. So that does lead to a limitation in who can access this tax credit. And that has real implications for low-income households who often don't owe a lot of taxes. So that's one consumer-facing incentive. There's another that is a renewable energy property credit, 25D tax credit, which is for things like geothermal heat pump systems, which pull heat and cool air from the ground to heat and cool our homes. So geothermal heat pumps, rooftop solar, and battery storage. So there's a 30% tax credit, uncapped and unlimited. So again, there's not going to be a point in which the Department of Treasury says, ooh, we ran out of money. And in addition to that, it's 30% off of the total cost. There's no cost limit in terms of the amount that you can get for the tax credit. So if the rooftop solar system costs $30,000, you can get $10,000 back on the cost of that system. If it's $50,000, you can get 30% back on that. So it's a really exciting opportunity. And how that connects to electrification, the more electric appliances you have, the more of those appliances can be powered by renewable energy, thus lowering your bill even further. So it's a really important tax credit as well. The Department of Treasury has said that both tax credits are available to renters also. We are working with them to ensure that actually can happen practically. And what that means practically is Treasury allowing things like portable heat pump systems or portable induction cooktops that can be moved from house to house or apartment to apartment to make sure that those machines can count. So those are like the tax credit side. There are also consumer rebates as well. And I mentioned the electrification rebates. These rebates are what it sounds. So incentives to help consumers purchase and install electric technologies, electric appliances. Through this program that it's not available, as of May 2023. These programs have not been stood up yet, but a household could get up to $14,000 in point of sale rebates to purchase and install electric appliances. Point of sale is a concept that means if I'm at the register, before I actually pay anything, the rebate takes, up to $14,000 off the top of the total cost. So if the total cost of that, of purchasing a heat pump, of purchasing a heat pump water heater, new wiring, because that counts as well. If the total cost just happens to come up to $16,000, for example, I could get up to $14,000 off of that. And so the amount that I would pay would be $2,000. So it's a really awesome and accessible tool that will be available to consumers out there. So that's another exciting sort of consumer facing incentive. The last incentive that I'll talk about that's consumer facing is the home efficiency rebate. And that is a program that is intended to incentivize improvements in home energy efficiency. So there are many ways to improve the efficiency of your home. You can invest in more efficient appliances, like electric appliances, which reduce the amount of time it takes to achieve the task that is set out. So if I want to heat my home to a certain degree, it'll do that more efficiently. So that's one way of improving the efficiency of your home. The other is to do things like home weatherization. So air sealing, insulation, which keeps hot air in, keeps cool air in. That's another way of improving efficiency. This program is designed to incentivize those types of improvements.
I want to talk a little bit more about what you raise around the challenges of ensuring accessibility for people with lower incomes and BIPOC folks generally. The tax rebate definitely raises the challenge that you noted around, people with lower incomes tend not to have any tax liability, so they can't take advantage of tax credits. Communities with lower incomes tend to be renters. I think there's a question of whether or not landlords would be interested in retrofitting and investing in their homes. Perhaps if it's cheaper, that might be a possibility, but oftentimes, the landlords may not be as interested in upgrading because it's the tenant who pays the utility bill. So what motivation is there unless, of course, that landlord is interested in their property value or interested in maybe addressing climate change. So I think when you look at all of this, there is a sort of question of what it will really take to ensure that everybody can make this transition. I think from our standpoint, our assessment is that as those with economic means are taking advantage of these incentives, that people with lower incomes won't be able to, and as a result will be stuck with fossil fuel energy that is not only dirtier, but more expensive. And so you have one segment of the population taking advantage of something that provides cost reductions and investments in property values, things that, will bring economic benefit. And then a whole other segment of the population that's going to be kind of stuck with, the inefficiencies, stuck with more pollution, stuck with the challenges of not having, electric stoves that have lower rates of risk to public health, those sorts of things. So when we dig into this segment of the population, what are you thinking are the solutions? What do we need to do to really make sure that everyone is included in this transition to clean energy?
Yeah, I think we have to make these technologies as accessible as possible. And that means ensuring that everyone at that moment in which they're replacing their appliance or installing a new appliance, that when they seek to do that, there is an efficient electric machine there waiting for them. And that's really our goal. Our goal is, by the end of this decade, the most accessible and most affordable appliances will be efficient electric versions. Policy is helpful there. When we adopt point of sale rebates, that is intended to lower the cost and ensure that at that moment of replacement, those households are better able to afford those technologies. Awareness too. It's really important that everyone, including, low income households, residents of disadvantaged communities, are aware of the fact that there are better machines out there for them, and make sure that they know that these machines, again, are for them. You deserve to have the best. You deserve to have machines that meet your basic needs. That includes a machine, an appliance that is going to succeed in heating and cooling your home at low cost without polluting and impacting your health. That is what we all deserve. And so it is important that we're reinforcing that message. To your point about low income households and residents of disadvantaged communities being left behind, I want to paint a little picture to help drive this point home. Let's envision you have two tables full of 10 people sitting down eating dinner. The table on the right has, a 4-course meal, it has dessert, all that good stuff. And the table on the left doesn't have quite as nice of a meal, but both are paying, somewhat similar in terms of the cost of that dinner. The 10 people at each table have agreed to split the cost between all of them, between the 10 people on the table on the right, the 10 people at the table on the left. Let's just say, for example, that, remember the table on the left is, the not as good food. let's just say one person gets up from that table, sees what's happening at the other table and says, oh, I want some of that. And just walks over to the other table and starts eating there. Now you've got the table on the left having 9 people, the table on the right having 11 people. Now, the table on the right is able to split the cost amongst the 11 people that are there. Now, the table on the left has to split the cost not among 10 people, but among 9. So each person is paying just a little bit more. Now, let's just say 8 more people go from that table on the left to the table on the right. Now that table on the right can split the cost among more people. People are paying less. And there's this one person that's responsible for the entire bill on the left. That's what we're facing right now with the transition to clean electric energy. The table on the right represents the future of electric. The table on the left represents our fossil fuel situation. More and more people are recognizing that the electric is the way to go. Those who are going to be left are going to be stuck paying the cost of the fossil fuel distribution system. And that is not fair in any way, but it's especially not fair if all the people who are left at that table are low income and just can't afford to, even if they want to. That just drives the point home why we need to make sure that this transition is equitable and that we're enacting policies that make it easier, not only for the population writ large to transition, but for low-income households specifically to be able to transition.
I think that's a great story to help people understand what is happening. And part of that is that we've relied on a market-driven approach, right? Or what I might think more of as kind of trickle-down economics. If people who can afford it do it, the price becomes cheaper, and then subsequently everyone can have access to that. And nothing in public policy has really shown me to believe that that's really how economics works for the people that I'm concerned about, the people that I work to sort of ensure part of the transition. I think that that's why we need to be really intentional, why the policy has to be directed and the benefits and incentives have to be intentionally directed to people with lower income. So I think that's, for us, I think the big question, I think what's next, how can we be creating policy together to make sure that we don't have people stuck at that table? and because I agree, I think the assumption is that you can go out and buy that. How hard is it to, come up with 10 grand to go do that? Even if you're at the point of sale, I'm trying to imagine someone who's going to Home Depot to buy a really expensive thing, looking for their point of sale rebate, how that's going to go, right? So, just a lot of the social and economic challenges of that. So I think the question for us is, what are we doing specifically? What is our approach there? So thanks, Jamal, for helping people understand the situation that we're in and the challenges that we have before us to figure out how to make that happen. So, great news about what we're doing federally to bring resources into the transition. We still have significant challenges to make that work for a pretty large segment of the U.S. population who very much want to be part of this, who very much want those great, healthier, cheaper options. The other question I had around environmental justice too, Jamal, is, I think electrification is really important. We're seeing more and more of that. The question that I've always wondered is, as a country, our source of electricity are still predominantly coal, natural gas, and nuclear. So although I have my electric vehicle and I'm plugging it in, the source of the energy is still highly polluting, and it's highly polluting for EJ communities in particular. We had a show recently around nuclear energy. Lots of communities are really working to fight fossil fuel infrastructure. Those are fossil fuel-based sources. And for nuclear, although not creator of greenhouse gas emissions yet, is a highly polluting source of energy. When we move to an all-electric future, which is, I think, what you all are talking about and thinking about, to what extent are you also engaged in, or that we should be engaged in, a conversation around the source of energy production?
Within our goal of going all electric, you're right, that electricity does have to come from somewhere. And within our mission, our intent is for everyone to have the opportunity and to ultimately transition to an all electric future. Because of that, and because that electricity has to come from somewhere, we are also invested in those sources of electricity transitioning to renewable energy. So that includes solar, wind, hydropower, geothermal. And, and the other ones that are out there. That is really important and, is a complementary part of our advocacy. Traditionally, our electricity system has been dominated by a few large machines. We're now seeing more and more distributed energy resources as well. So that is something like rooftop solar system, a battery storage system, community solar. These are all distributed because they're not centralized. If you look from an aerial view at a neighborhood with 100 homes where 50 of them have rooftop solar, those 50 homes are providing energy to their own home, maybe back to the grid as well. And that is energy and electricity that doesn't need to come from the large system. So the more that we're investing in these types of distributed energy resources, the less we are reliant on large machines like coal plants, natural gas plants, etc. So that enables us to transition more of those plants also to, nuclear or utility scale solar or utility scale geothermal to help meet that load. So that is a critical part of this vision of the future that we have. We're just using the demand for electricity to help drive that transition.
So in the work that you're doing around electrification, what are some recommendations that you have for our listeners, whether they be, environmental justice organizations, community members, others who are listening to the show? I mean, what suggestions would you have for them to help us on this effort towards electrification?
When we think about, again, environmental justice communities that not only deal with, large polluting machines and power plants, but also are often the same communities that are dealing with disproportionate health impacts or disproportionate health outcomes, that spend more of their money on energy, that spend more of their money on rent or on housing. And these types of like bundled burdens that we experience, are killing us. It's really important in my mind that we are continuing to push back on that. Now we have another tool in our toolbox. We can choose the types of machines that we use on a day-to-day basis. And that in itself can help to combat the pollution that is existing in our communities. The less demand that we have for fossil fuel polluting large machines, the less need there is for them, the increased likelihood of them shutting down. Let's use all of the tools in our toolbox. We definitely will still need to push for the transition of, large oil and gas plants. And at the same time, we can do things within our own control. Let's let our neighbors know that there are better machines out there for them. Let's help them access it. Let's push for more. Let's push for better, because we deserve that.
So Jamal, when you think about the movement today around electrification and anything in particular around the movement around environmental justice, what gives you hope?
The pure act of like wanting something to be better, which I think is at the core of advocacy, is tremendous and is super fascinating and provides me with a lot of hope. The refusal to let our current situation be the end all be all is a tremendous source of hope for me. There are a lot of leaders who are continuously pushing for more, pushing for better for our communities. And without that push, like, we wouldn't be where we are today in this movement. We were able to pass something like the Inflation Reduction Act, which provides not only, a record number of funding and incentives for clean energy, but also, a record number of funding for environmental justice. And that was built upon decades of advocacy and, pushing for our policymakers to recognize that the brunt of a lot of community and environmental issues falls on the shoulders of the few communities and individuals that have borne the brunt of other issues in the past. And, a lot of that is because of intentional policy and intentional action. This would have never happened had it not been for that constant and consistent desire for better. And so, I'm envisioning what we're doing now, pushing for more and pushing for better, leading to better outcomes in the future. We're not done. There's definitely more to be done. And, there's generations of us, coming up behind us, and the youth movement is getting stronger. that like constant source of like, I want things to be better for my community will, I think, result in things being better for our communities.
Thank you, Jamal, for being with us today, and thanks to our listeners for joining us on the Just Solutions podcast. Special thanks to our producer, Tayler Ward, and our recording engineer and editor, Angel Batista. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to know more about our work at Just Solutions, visit our website at justsolutionscollective.org. You can also follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook for the latest episodes. Together, we are driving community-created and equity-centered solutions to the climate crisis. We hope you'll join us for our next episode.